I think I always said, so we've been Dockers members for about 15 years. And I always say we're Dockers members because it helps build resilience in our children.
G'day and welcome to this week's segment of Farm Yarns, where we dive behind the audio to find out who inspires our guests, what motivates them, what they would like to debunk, and also what resources they lean on to get the most out of their agri business. So let's get down to it. Farm Yarns. Well, David, you're on Farm Spice Podcast. Now you join us for what could be a dangerous, but hopefully not so much, a farm yarn. So thanks for coming on for a farm yarn.
No, thanks, Jack. Don't know what to expect, mate.
It's quite open. People have been vulnerable on here, but just to get to know you, who's behind the audio, who's behind Agrimaster, and what makes you tick, what motivates you. But first of all, how are you? How you been going lately?
Yeah, I've been going well, mate. So it's I was saying it's having been a farmer for 10 years and doing this for 20 years, I was just saying, it's completely different worlds, and so they both have their own different challenges.
Keeping you on your toes, no doubt.
Yeah, definitely. Well and truly.
And as it keeps you on your toes, what's your morning routine? How do you kick the day off?
Oh, my morning routine. Like I was telling you before, I'm a big consumer of podcasts, professional. So my routine is I get up about just before 6 every day. And I tend to go down and I do two things. I do a Stoic reflection and journal. So I read a passage of Stoicism from one of the Stoics, and then I journal on that on a question every morning. Yep. And then I have a bullet journal where I plan my whole day out. I write out what I'm doing for the day, my 3 key, what I call most important tasks, or MITs, and the key things I have to, my habits I have, my eating habits, exercise habits, etc. And I do that every day. And so then it's just getting ready and getting all I've got 3 boys, Nat and I, and so getting them, only one's at home now. Well, they're sort of all at home on and off.
I think I was going to say they always are, as if I've got kids, but I don't. I think we always are. We're tending in to drop in, drop out of that. But I want to know, if you don't finish something on your list, what do you do? Do you just roll it to the next day, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I follow really about 15 years ago. I read this great book called GDT, or Getting Things Done. I can't remember who wrote it, but to me it was revolutionary. It was the idea that a lot of people get stressed about to-do lists because they think they have to complete everything on their to-do list and they have to prioritize it, right? And the reality is our days, the priority of what's important today is going to be completely different tomorrow. So the idea is I run it a bit like we do with our software. In software, we run user stories, and we have a backlog. And every sprint, you just prioritize what you're going to do on the backlog. I run my to-do list like this. I have a massive to-do list, and each day I choose new things to go. The most important 3 things. I only pick 3, and if I do those 3, I'll pick another one. Now it goes back to scratch every day. So even if I miss that thing today, it gets back into the list. So there might be 5 other things that are more important than that the next day. So it might not be on the list tomorrow. So if something has a definite time, if it has actual time it has to be done, well, I'll actually put that in my calendar as something that in other words, if it's so important that it has to be done today, I block the time out to do it. So otherwise it just goes on to the MIT list.
Great stuff. Well, everyone puts it a little bit differently. I always wonder, like, when you do stuff individually, like, oh, everyone does it this way, but maybe if you step back a bit, it's like, maybe I've been doing it the wrong way the whole time.
It's the same with emails. I can't remember who I picked the tip off with, but these context, you would have heard of things like empty inbox. And I call it the 3 Ds. You either, do it, defer it, or delegate it. Yep. And I love that too, because a full inbox stresses the hell out of me. So, and even that little routine, really helps.
Yeah, so there's little things that I hope that people can pull from these farm yarns to help them, because we don't know until we know in the end. But David, you're off a farm. Tell us in 60 seconds, what's your favourite memory being on a farm?
Oh, for me, I used to love walking with my dogs behind sheep. So we used to run about 20,000 merinos, and we used to run them in mobs of 2 to 4,000. And so what I used to love being is drop me at the back of the farm, 2 dogs, 4,000 merinos, and I used to love walking them into the sheds, just with my dogs.
As a kid,
Even as an adult, So even when I was in my 20s, I used to play polo cross. So I used to walk behind the sheep with my polo cross racket and my 2 dogs, and love that. I don't miss crutching wet sheep in the rain, but I do. I do miss walking behind sheep for 4 hours with my dogs. So I absolutely love that. And the other thing is early mornings, even when I have cold motorbike hands, is spider webs in ring lock. There's just nothing like dew on spider webs in ring lock early in the morning. It's just, and just the smell of it, even I don't get back very often, but when I do, there's just a smell that just, I don't know, I just love.
talking about smells, like when I push the U's, it's just all sort of normal and everything. We got white dorper studs, so and then you push the rams and you can just smell their testosterone
Yeah.
exuding out.
I'm even weird. I love the smell of wet sheep around the shed.
Yeah. Or your wet Akubra, or like your wet felt hats.
Yeah.
I think that smells nice. Oh,
Yeah.
kick it into the next one. Who's been the most influential for you in your life?
I'm going to be really nerdy here. Look, my father. My father's a quiet man, incredibly accomplished, and he's a farmer. He's a software developer. He's been an amateur photographer. He doesn't say much. He just does, and I've always really admired that because I'm a big talker. I mean, listen to me, and so I really admire his quiet wisdom, and so what I do is I look for that in other people. So they're the people, even though maybe I'm not that person, I really admire that humble wisdom in people. And so he's definitely a big role model for me. But I seek out, I really do seek out wisdom from others, and it doesn't matter what they do. I love the idea. And if I had one big wish for agriculture, that people like yourself and myself and others expose the farm world to worlds outside agriculture, business, people, leaders, speakers. And I love that mixture of ideas. Like I just read a book finished a book last week from a hedge fund manager in New York. And I was going, oh my God. And I always had this particular view of hedge fund managers in my head. And this book is just amazing. And I'm never going to be a hedge fund manager, but there's some wisdom in there that I just love. So I just seek that out in others. But my real role model in life is definitely my father.
Great stuff. And I'm probably quite the same, reading out of my sort of comfort zone, but also an interest that you can sort of pull back into it. And you sort of subtly improve yourself, your days, because you sort of remember that in your conscience, but you're not quite aware of it at the time.
Yeah, I think there's all these connections. I think I remember back in the days, there used to be an ag conference. I can't remember what it's called. I was in South Australia at the time, and the keynote speaker was a guy who was a CEO of an oil and gas company. Loved it. And his job, he'd never been I don't think he hadn't been exposed to farming much in his life, but he came to speak about, as an oil and gas exec, how would he look at farming? But I loved it. It created this perspective and I think, I used to belong to this CEO group in Perth, and it's called Tech. They're all over Australia. But what it was is every CEO in there had to be from a different industry, and I love that. So I'd be sitting at the table, and we'd sit together. We'd meet together for a day once a month, and there would be someone from mining and someone from aged care, and that was just an amazing melting pot. I was the only software person there, and I was just saying, imagine every farmer met up with every month. And with all the different business leaders in town, the manufacturing people, the amount of stuff they'd learn from each other. And the beauty of it is you don't know how each other's businesses work, and that makes the magic happen.
Absolutely. And off the back of that, what's a myth you'd like to debunk about your role in the industry? Is there any myths out there that get thrown around?
I think software has a massive myth. We always joke about this with our software developers. A lot of people think it's magic.
Yeah.
It's not. Software is incredibly complex, and it works a lot slower and costs a lot more than most people think. I think we've grown up with this idea of the Googles and the Facebooks and those sorts of things. And I think the biggest myth is that, I think the one question that's going to make a software developer turn white is when someone says, can you just do this, right? They go, oh, we just want a button there. And in reality, that might be $300,000 worth of developer time, that one button. And I think we, especially in the startup world and everything like that, is the complexity of software. And I think you would have interviewed other maybe software people on the thing. It's a very expensive, very risky, very complex world. And to be quite honest, as a farmer coming into software, even growing up with a father who was a software developer, I underestimated the cost and complexity of software. And I think this is a big myth that, we all sit, even me as a consumer of software, why can't they just do that? Not realizing that's probably taking their whole team of 10 off something and putting it onto it for a year. And I think that's certainly a big myth and I think as consumers, maybe, I don't know, it might, I think it's just such a world that's so hard to understand because it seems like a lot of magic to a lot of people.
It's just like the ticket system at the supermarket. You just grab a ticket and get it in line to improve it.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing is that I think every software product that you use, they've got thousands of users going, I just want this and I just want that. And they've got a huge system like ours that records all those things. And we have meetings every 3 weeks in this place trying to prioritize which one of those is going to have the biggest benefit to users or not. And I think all of your products have the same thing. It's just like the ticket system, like you explained, Jack.
Beautiful. And I was going to ask night owl or early riser. I think we know you're an early riser, but what sporting team do you go for instead?
I'm a suffering Fremantle Dockers supporter. Yeah. So, yeah. So, I think I always said, so we've been Dockers members for about 15 years. And I always say we're Dockers members because it helps build resilience in our children. So we've got 3 sons and we've taken them to the footy most of their lives.
Whose home ground is the Optus Stadium?
Both Eagles and Dockers, yeah.
Oh, it is. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So they both have their own training facilities in separate places, but their home ground is no one trains at the stadium.
I actually couldn't tell you anyone that plays in any AFL team other than Dustin Martin. Is that his last name?
Dustin Martin. I think he's actually, I don't know if he's Australian or he's a Kiwi, but
yeah, well, even so, I don't know too much about AFL. So let's move on. What's hot and what's not about technology at the moment for you? What's working, what's not?
I think definitely in the world there's a big I'd say in the tech world at the moment, AI is obviously the hot topic. I think certainly not for us yet, but it's certainly something that we're keeping an eye on. But I think AI is just another extension of machine learning and data. And so I think it's definitely but I think at the end of the day, I've learned over the years not to get too excited about this, but look at these things to go, okay, does this thing, as excited as the world is about it, solve any problem that's not being solved now already? So I think what happens is we tend to get really overexcited about something in technology as if it's going to suddenly transform our lives. But we don't sit there and go, do we actually have a problem that we need solving? So I tend to look at these things. So last year it was, data and machines. Before that it was IoT, and then drones and all that sort of stuff. At the moment, it's AI. That will run its course. It'll become, so what these things become at the moment is eventually business as usual. So for example, now in software development, there's AI tools already, right? But what they are is they use them to check coding for bugs and errors and things like that. So it's a lot like, say you might use Grammarly to check spelling. Literally, so I think that, and I think AI is going to make a big difference, not in helping people write emails and letters and finish uni assignments, which I think is just rubbish, but it's going to make a massive difference in productivity. So, for example, one person might be able to do the work of 2 people with the help of AI, for example. And I think, so I've got no idea how it's going to play out. It's very, very, very early days. although it's getting a lot of press. But I think eventually it may be, we're suffering a labour shortage globally at the moment. So in every industry, especially in agriculture, but in software, in retail, everywhere. So, and the world population's now shrinking. So I think it's going to be a massive problem. So I think AI is going to be one of the small parts of the recipe that helps solve that problem.
Absolutely. I've had a dabble in ChatGPT. I've actually written a couple of bios for guests on there, obviously reiterated a little bit on there, but it's exciting to see. And I edited a video for YouTube the other day. Just chucked it in one that gave me 7 days free sort of trial. So it's interesting to have a play around and have a look into what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, and I think we're in that experimental stage, isn't it? And I think that's a classic example for you, Jack, is, okay, so instead of you as an operator can say, okay, I can halve my editing or my post-production time down by using this tool. And I think that's where AI is going to be. It's not going to essentially replace people. Probably in the same way a washing machine replaced a whole lot of people hand washing.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's pretty exciting. And I think what it does, it just increases, you know, the you always hear the government talking about productivities being flat. This is one of those productivity drivers. And I think in farming, it's going to maybe, when someone gets a handle on it, it might help. So farming data is one of those things that is at the moment pretty, there's a lot of it, but it's not being used very well. So AI might help leverage that a bit. So people have got to trust it as well. So, you know, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. So we're definitely experimenting with it.
A wait and see, or maybe experiment and see how it goes on.
Yeah, and I think that's probably much how I approach anything. Don't think it's going to be more. It's not as good as probably you think it is, but it's better than rubbish. So it's just play with it and experiment like you've been doing it. Probably the best. Sorry.
And it might, you might be sitting around playing with it on a Friday night. The next question was, are you going out on a Friday night for a few after work beers, or are you going to stay in?
Oh, I'm in tonight, but I don't mind. We have a really sorry, yeah, Friday, yeah. No, we have a really good group of friends here, and so every now and then we'll just you know, with the boys, we'll just go. We have a local bar near us, and we just go and have beers at Unicorn. Or this is the same group. We go 4-wheel driving and camping together a fair bit, and so often book out a restaurant. I was just talking to my middle son, who works as a chef in a restaurant, and I said, we're that annoying group that go there at 7 and we're still there at 12 when you all want to go home, and we're just drinking cheese and wine. So we're lucky enough to have a really great group of supportive friends like that. And it's I don't mind sitting around eating cheese and red wine for 4 hours. It's great.
Doesn't sound bad at all. And what's something that flies under the radar within the media for yourself? What do you think we should be having a look at within your own experience?
If I stuck to I'll stick to an agricultural term here in media. Okay, there's probably two things. First of all, the amount of fundamental structural change that's happening in the global economy at the moment. We tend to, the daily news cycle tends to be obsessed with, I don't know, whether China wants Taiwan or what's happening in Ukraine, you know, but in the context of the fundamental massive shifts in the global economy, you know, globalization is starting to break down. Now, that's probably not going to be a disadvantage for Australia, America, places like that, but it will be for other parts of the world. So fundamentally, in the next 10 years, I'm sort of looking forward and going, so there's these bigger discussions, like over the 10 years, let's think that the era of cheap things, I think, is ending, right? So we've been so used to having massive spending power of the money we have, you know, cheap tellies and cars. And I think from what I've read and experiencing, I think that era is coming to an end. So it's, to me, I think what the media is not discussing is how do we set ourselves up for this? What does our economy, what's our lives look like if everything was double the price as it is now?
Yeah.
You know, how does that affect agriculture? How does that affect, I don't know, your home? How does that affect the car you drive or the school your kids go to? And I think that's sort of where the world's sort of heading. And I think there should be more of that discussion within, rather than hoping for the best, like you say, hope's not a strategy, just looking at, okay, there's been fundamental changes happening. So as a business, as an individual, how would my life look differently? Should I start thinking about that, preparing for that, talking to my kids about it? So I talk to our boys about it all the time. Okay, the world that you're going to have your adult life in is going to look very different to the one that I had my adult life in.
Yeah.
So, and it's going to look different. So be aware of that. Don't just put your head in the sand because it's going to affect you. And in agriculture, I would, it's just the whole thing. I think the world as itself is very detached from the reality of agriculture. If you went to anyone in Australia and said, go onto the internet and Google pictures about farming, they're going to have a bunch of ducks and chickens, some guy in overalls with a red barn, which we don't have in Australia. And and I think, and they'll go, that's what farm looks like. And I go, yeah, Disney, it does. Yeah. But I think that's still, and I think that's becoming not less so, it's becoming more so. So I think, I don't know how to solve that from a media point of view, but it's certainly something that and I think it's about farmers. Farmers are large, complex, multi-million-dollar industrial businesses almost. That's almost how you have to view them these days. But their brand
themselves. Yeah.
Sorry?
They're CEO themselves now, farmers.
Oh, and their CEOs are
academic as the days go on.
Yeah, and they run very big, very complex, very risky businesses, and bigger than probably the vast majority of businesses in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, or Brisbane. Like these are big operations, and I don't think farmers even rate themselves as well as they should. They're running incredibly big, complex, risky businesses, and if they went into any business in any urban area, they'd probably start it up and go, "Was this it?"
Yeah. Well, they're two cracking observations you've made there, and they may even be worth an episode either on your podcast or our podcast one day. But within agriculture, bringing it back to farming and the report that came out locally here, or on the East Coast anyway, about farmers' mental health doing it pretty bad during the disasters, but also outside of disaster areas, farmers don't always have the best mental fitness. What's something that you do to look after yourself that some others out there that may find the same sort of thing?
I think it's escape your day-to-day reality. I think for example, I live in a tech world, and I'm still, I suppose, a hands-on farmer at heart, but I live in a software business, and I have a hobby. So I do. So my hobby is I learn to do things. I study Japanese, which is really obscure. I do it not because I know Japanese people. It's really hard, and it's just something different. The other thing is I do hand tool woodworking with no machines. And I do that deliberately because for me, it is like 8 hours of meditation. There's no noise. It requires a lot of skill. I have to concentrate. And for me, I can have the worst day ever at work, and I can go spend 2 hours with a piece of jarrah in the workshop, and I'm a happy man, listening to a podcast, doing a bit of woodwork. And I think, and just sometimes I think the other thing I do is no matter how, let's say, and this is the human condition. The human condition is often pretty tough. Is when I'm having a really bad day, instead of feeling sorry for myself, I literally I woke up this morning and I was just dead tired. I thought, I was having one of those days. I just, didn't want to get up and go to work today. But I got up, had a shower, and I go, okay, shit, I've got a good company. It's a nice day. I live in Perth. God, where else would you want to live? I've got 3 boys, and and I go, oh well, it's pretty good, really. And then just got on my day. So it's this. I actually heard this great quote the other day. It was from Michael J. Fox, who has Parkinson's disease, as most people will be aware. And he goes, optimism is sustainable as long as you have gratitude. And I love that. Right. So it doesn't matter how bad you have. So, for example, if you're on the farm, right, you're having a really tough day, and I reckon mental health within agriculture is something that is of massive concern, especially because there's less and less farmers and they're becoming increasingly isolated, right? So you go to a district now, especially in the dryland areas, and there's no one for miles. There's no footy club left. It's a serious issue, and mainly due to isolation. I reckon it's a tough place to live now, because when I grew up, there would have been 20 people in our tiny little district. Now there's just my brother and someone else. So, and that's like every district. So I think it's tough. But also to think that this is not my only option. And I think that's another thing that I think I never regarded when I was a farmer, right? So I'm sitting here, I'm on a bunch of land and I'm farming. I don't have to do this, right? I could, depending on what farm you have, I don't know how big your farm is, but I could sell this today, have a few $1 million in my pocket, and do something else.
Yeah.
No, I don't, no one's making you do this. And I think I like that idea of choice. And I think mental health sometimes is a function of we don't feel like we have a choice, or our anxiety is the fact that we don't have choice. And I think I'd love every farmer to know that I used to be a farmer and I love being a farmer, but I also love my post-farming life too. So in the fact that if you were never a farmer, I can guarantee you'll find something and go, why didn't I do this 20 years ago? So you don't have to do it if it's not cutting it.
Absolutely. I think that's always good. Farmers love options, but they don't always know they're right there for them as well. And definitely 2023, there'll be someone there ready to buy the farm, I'm sure.
Yeah, and also you have skills. I mean, like I just said before, farmers have skills, like real skills, right? And they're in the context of, and I've met hundreds and hundreds of people in every type of business since being in Perth. And farm skills are really up there, right? So if you didn't want to do this, you have real skills that can be deployed anywhere. Yeah. So yeah, I think I think it's and look after each other, and I really love when I'm going around the farming areas these days is, these really, I was in a pub in Darren, I think last year in the gents.
Yeah.
And above the urinals, go, have you checked on a mate today? Love it. And I think it's that stuff, because there's not many of you, you've got to make extra effort now. Used to be before, you used to go to the tennis club or go to the footy club and everybody was there. And now you actually have to make that extra effort. And maybe I'm not there, I'm not living it. So I feel weird trying to give advice, but so I won't. But I was just saying, especially guys, girls tend to be pretty good at it, but guys, we tend to be really bad at it. Is make an effort.
It's that effort, and it's also a toggle. Like you go to the trough and you get someone like, have you talked to a mate today? Checked in with them. I think we need to toggle quite consistently about it as well. Not just not the person fall off the cliff, but for that conversation to fall off the cliff. Wrong use of analogy there, but and how important that is. It's vital.
And I think it is, and I think I can even speak for myself. As a guy, it's confronting. But it can feel weird.
Yeah.
But it's better than the alternative, yeah. So and I think now, I think I don't know what generation you are, Jack, but my generation was really bad at it.
Yeah.
People probably under 40 are, I'm over 50, but people under 40 tend to be, I think, a bit better at it than my gen. But, and I think when everyone's out there and they're isolated, you're out there, you might be on a farm by yourself for a week, 2 weeks, and so I remember when I was a farmer, Jesus, the amount of stuff you can get stuck in your own head in that time is nuts.
Yeah.
So, I think, and even if like you said, if you're standing next to a mate at the top of the footy club, or you haven't heard from them for a week, give them a call, I think it's pretty important. And I really enjoy that when I'm having a bad week. If I have one of my mates, Dave, ring me up and goes, how about we just 4 of us go up to the Unicorn and have a beer? Sometimes that's enough to sustain me for another 2 weeks. It's all good.
Yeah. Beautiful. There's some great recommendations. But tell us something that the audience may not know about you. What's that thing?
Oh, I think I just told you. Oh,
I was trying
as a West Australian living in this hot joint, I love snowboarding.
Where you'd come down to Thredbo and Perisher, and that would be
no. Do you know what? As a person from WA, it's actually cheaper for us to go to Japan, so we tend to go to Japan snowboarding. And I love it. So I only see snow for 2 weeks a year if I'm lucky. But yeah, I absolutely love it. And even my oldest son now, that's what he's doing now. He's just finished his uni degree and he's working in Buller as a snowboard tech and in retail up there. So he, living the dream.
And a productivity hack that you make your day better, either something that you use or something that you don't. What's that?
I think I've told you before. My bullet journal, and this is just the latest version of what I've been doing most of my life. The most important task system. My big productivity hack is two things: empty mailbox and only prioritizing three important things a day. And I can guarantee you won't get those three important things done. And keeping a very flexible to-do list. And that's the thing, because you could plan your whole, my neighbor. So back when I was I could say this, none of this is new. And is, plan your day, do the best you can to achieve that one or three things, and then just revisit it the next morning and just revisit it every morning. And don't beat yourself up if you can't achieve it. You're only human,
Yeah, I think it's in that as well. I've learned that a little bit as well. But you've dropped a fair few throughout the episodes. A book recommendation for the Farmers Book Club. I started an Instagram page the other day. I've got nearly 60 on there, I think, but I think that's pretty substantial. A couple of farmers looking to read or expand their minds. What's your book?
All right, I'll do so. There's 1,000 business books I can recommend, but I'll do a non-business one. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and Eamon, can't even say his like Savansky.
I've actually read that, and it was a good one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's really good. And probably the last one, actually, I'm going to look up my phone, Jack. I've just finished. There's one at the moment, which is I'd actually give you a two actually on economics. One is Why Nations Fail, and that's a really good one about global, what's happening in the planet at the moment, and all the geopolitical stuff that's happening. And I think that's super relevant for farmers, especially as it relates to commodities and fertilizer, etc. And probably one that's a peer to that is one by what's his name, Ray Dalio. Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order is another really nerdy economics book that you can almost look at my playlist. But my reading list is another really great one.
We'll have to add them into the Farmers Book Club. You may even be able to be our 61st member. But as the sun started to shine on my face, I think we've gotten on a little bit with this farm yarn, but I think you've beaten the time that with Wendy Main. I think it's good for us to divulge how people do things themselves rather than your business Agrimaster and how it works for farmers, but it's how you interact with the world and, I don't know, that sort of larger conversations I want to get out of these.
Definitely. Thank you very much. I quite enjoyed it, Jack.
Beautiful. I'll leave it there, David. Thank you very much.
I reckon these farm yarns are peaking, and I'm really happy of where they've gone, so that I and yourself listening on the other end can find out a little bit more about these people. What makes them drive? Why are they successful? Why is that paddock successful? Why wasn't the other one? And what makes them tick? I think it's pretty cool to find out that in agriculture, we just read the news mainly and not about the people that work within it. And this is a dive behind the scenes. So on that, if you have a farm yarn yourself, or you want to nominate someone with a cracking farm yarn, a great story of growing up, their childhood, and to where they've gotten to now, I'd love to hear that farm yarn. So email me, hello@farmsadvice.com.au. Keep on farming.